A Florida judge overseeing a fierce recount battle is urging all sides to ramp down the rhetoric after Florida Governor Rick Scott alleged voter fraud and President Trump weighed in to claim ballots were massively infected. Circuit Chief Judge Tuter said during emergency hearing Monday that there is a need to reassure citizens that the integrity of the Florida recount is being protected and said there was not in-face evidence of fraud. The judge said he see no evidence of wrongdoing in the vote counting in Broward County. But Trump claims corruption among Democratic officials in charge of a few Florida counties has rendered the process a crooked political exercise designed to overturn a legitimate result. He issued the admonition as President Donald Trump complained Democrats had corrupted the process and even called for stopping the count of ballots in favor of the election night projections reached by broadcast networks. The Florida election should be called in favor of Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis in that large numbers of new ballots showed up out of nowhere and many ballots are missing or forged, Trump tweeted. An honest vote count is no longer possible, ballots massively infected must go with election night. But having made no such determination of fraud, Judge Tuter urged lawyers for Governor Rick Scott, the GOP Senate candidate, and others representing the Republican and Democratic parties, and their candidates as well as the Broward County Elections Office, to agree on some minor additions in security, including the addition of 3 more law enforcement officers to keep an eye on things. Scott himself had alleged voter fraud without yet providing proof. And the judge said from the bench that if anyone any evidence of voter fraud or irregularities, they should report it to law enforcement. Democratic U.S. Senator Bill Nelson is suing the Florida Department of State in an effort to count vote-by-mail ballots that were postmarked before Election Day, but not delivered before polls closed. Nelson's attorney, Marc Elias, filed the lawsuit Monday, saying voters should not be disenfranchised because of mail delivery delays that aren't their fault. Unofficial election results show Nelson trailing Republican Governor Rick Scott by 0.14 percentage points. As an example, he cited the Miami-Dade County postal facility that was evacuated because explosive devices sent to prominent Democrats were processed there. Florida's 7 p.m. Election Day receipt deadline for vote-by-mail ballots burdens the right to vote of eligible voters, the suit said. Elias wants all ballots postmarked before November 6 to be counted if they are received within 10 days of the election. A state recount is mandated under Florida law if the candidates are separated by less than 0.5% of the vote. Scott's lead has dwindled to about 13,000 votes, a number that is still a tall hurdle for Nelson to overcome even in a populous state like Florida. As a percentage, Scott is at 51.1 to Nelson's 49.9% of the vote following an angry contest that saw repeated interventions by Trump in the final days of the campaign. Florida law requires machine recounts of ballots in races where less than 0.5% of votes separate the top 2 finishers. For races with margins less than 0.25%, votes must be recounted by hand. Trump tweeted Saturday, trying to steal 2 big elections in Florida, and warned, "We are watching closely." Scott once again leveled fraud accusations on Fox News Sunday, saying, Nelson is clearly trying to commit fraud to try to win this election, and branding him a sore loser, even though the recount was mandatory. His lawyer said that a non-citizen should vote. That's one. Number 2. He's gone to trial and said that fraudulent ballots should be counted. Ballots have already been thrown out because they were not done properly. He said those should be counted, Scott said. Nelson responded that Scott was suing to try and stop voters from having their legal ballot counted as intended. He added he's doing this for the same reason he's been making false and panicked claims about voter fraud. He's worried that when all the votes are counted, he'll lose the election, Nelson said in a statement. Juan Peñalosa, executive director of the Florida Democratic Party, accused Scott of using his position to consolidate power by cutting at the very core of our democracy.